The escape of Eric Lomax. Eric Lomax was a British Army officer who was captured by the Japanese in Singapore in 1942. He was sent to work on the notorious Burma Railway, where he endured brutal treatment and torture by his captors. He was one of the few survivors of the railway, which claimed the lives of more than 12,000 Allied prisoners of war. One of the most traumatic experiences for Lomax was when he was interrogated and tortured by the Japanese for possessing a radio receiver that he and his fellow prisoners had secretly built. He was beaten, burned, waterboarded, and electrocuted by a Japanese officer named Nagase Takashi, who showed no mercy or remorse. Lomax never forgot the face and voice of his tormentor, who haunted his nightmares for decades. He suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anger. He had difficulty forming relationships and trusting people. He became obsessed with finding Nagase and taking revenge. In 1980, Lomax learned from a newspaper article that Nagase was still alive and had become a Buddhist monk. He also learned that Nagase had expressed regret and sorrow for his actions during the war and had dedicated his life to promoting peace and reconciliation between former enemies. Lomax decided to confront Nagase and face his demons. He wrote a letter to Nagase, expressing his hatred and resentment. He also asked Nagase to meet him in person at the bridge over the River Kwai in Thailand, where they had both witnessed the horrors of the railway. In 1993, Lomax and Nagase met for the first time since the war. It was a tense and emotional encounter, full of fear and uncertainty. But it was also a turning point for both men. They talked about their experiences, their feelings, and their hopes. They realized that they were both victims of the war and that they shared a common humanity. Lomax found the courage to forgive Nagase, who apologized sincerely and asked for his forgiveness. They embraced each other and cried. They became friends and kept in touch until their deaths. Lomax's story is a remarkable example of how one can overcome the trauma of war and find healing and redemption through forgiveness and reconciliation. It is also a testament to the power of human compassion and dignity. The Last March. Jack was a young British soldier who fought in the Burma campaign during the Second World War. He was captured by the Japanese in May 1944, along with thousands of other Allied prisoners of war. He was sent to a prison camp near Rangoon, where he endured starvation, disease, and torture. In January 1945, as the British forces advanced towards Rangoon, the Japanese decided to evacuate the prison camp and force the prisoners to march northwards. The march was a nightmare of brutality and suffering. The prisoners had to walk for hundreds of miles with little food, water, or medical care. They were beaten, bayoneted, and shot by their guards if they fell behind or tried to escape. Many died along the way from exhaustion, infection, or execution. Jack was one of the few who survived the march. He was determined to live and see his family again. He had a wife, Mary, and a son, Tommy, who was born after he left for war. He had never seen his son's face, but he carried a photo of him in his pocket. He looked at it every night before he slept and prayed that he would make it home. One day, in March 1945, Jack and the other survivors reached a railway station near Mandalay. They were told that they would board a train that would take them to another camp. Jack hoped that this would be the end of their ordeal and that they would soon be liberated by the British forces. He was wrong. As they waited on the platform, a group of American bombers appeared in the sky. They had mistaken the station for a military target and dropped their bombs on it. The station was engulfed in flames and smoke. Jack felt a blast of heat and pain, and then everything went black. He never saw his family again. This story is based on the historical facts of Britain's war in the Far East during WW2 123. and the Black Friday incident on 24th of March 1945, when American bombers killed hundreds of Allied prisoners of war at Pegu railway station in Burma. It is a fictional account of one possible scenario of how a British soldier might have been affected by the war and its tragic outcome. It is not intended to glorify or justify any side of the conflict, but rather to show the human cost and suffering of war on both sides. The Last Flight. Harry was a young British pilot who flew in the Battle of Britain during the Second World War. He was a member of the Royal Air Force's 303 Squadron, which was composed of Polish pilots who had escaped from Nazi-occupied Poland. He was one of the few Englishmen in the squadron, and he admired the courage and skill of his Polish comrades. Harry loved flying and fighting for his country. He had a girlfriend, Betty, who worked as a nurse in London. They had met at a dance hall before the war, and they wrote letters to each other every week. They planned to get married after the war. One day, in September 1940, Harry and his squadron were scrambled to intercept a large formation of German bombers and fighters heading for London. They took off from their base in Northolt and climbed into the sky. Harry was flying a Spitfire, a fast and agile fighter plane. He felt confident and excited as he joined his wingman Jan, a Polish ace. They soon spotted the enemy planes flying in tight formations. Harry and Jan dived into the fray, firing their machine guns at the bombers. They saw some of them burst into flames and fall to the ground. They also dodged the bullets and cannon shells from the German fighters who tried to protect their bombers. Harry managed to shoot down 2 bombers and 1 fighter. He felt a surge of pride and joy as he saw his kills confirmed by Jan. He was having the best day of his life, but then he made a fatal mistake. He got too close to a bomber that he had just damaged. He wanted to finish it off with one more burst of fire. He did not see the rear gunner, who had survived the attack. The gunner aimed his machine gun at Harry's cockpit and pulled the trigger. Harry felt a sharp pain in his chest and head. He saw blood splatter on his windshield. He lost control of his plane, which started to spin and dive. He tried to bail out, but it was too late. His plane crashed into a field near Biggin Hill. He never saw Betty again. This story is based on the historical facts of Britain's war in Europe during WW2 and the Battle of Britain in 1940, when RAF pilots fought against Luftwaffe bombers and fighters over England. It is a fictional account of one possible scenario of how a British pilot might have been affected by the war and its tragic outcome. It is not intended to glorify or justify any side of the conflict, but rather to show the human cost and suffering of war on both sides.